My name is Maya Vance, and at exactly 6:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, I realized that blood isn't thicker than water. It's thinner than a bank statement. I was standing on the sidewalk of Elm Street, watching the heavy October rain soak through the cardboard boxes that held my entire life. My father, David, was standing on the porch, his arms crossed over his chest, looking down at me like I was a stranger who had trespassed on his lawn. Beside him, my mother, Sarah, was holding a trash bag containing my winter coats. She didn't look at me. She just dropped the bag onto the wet driveway. "You've had 22 years of a free ride, Maya," my father shouted over the thunder. "If you can't contribute to this house, you don't belong in it. Your sister is moving into your room tonight. She's actually going to make something of herself." My sister, Chloe, was 20. She was currently finding herself by taking a gap year funded entirely by my parents' dwindling savings. I was working 2 jobs and trying to finish my degree, but because I hadn't handed over my last paycheck to cover my father's gambling debts, I was now unproductive. "Dad, it's pouring," I said, my voice shaking. "Just let me keep my things in the garage until I find a place." "The garage is for people who pay rent," he snapped. He turned around and slammed the front door. I heard the deadbolt click. It was a sound I would never forget, the sound of a door closing on the only home I'd ever known. I stood there for a long time, the rain stinging my eyes. I looked at the boxes. My books, my laptop, the small wooden box my grandmother had given me before she passed away. Everything was getting ruined. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the realization that I was truly alone. But my father had made one massive mistake. He thought he knew everything about me. He thought I was just a broke college student with nowhere to go. He didn't know about the secret meetings I'd been having with Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's old estate lawyer. He didn't know that while he was busy betting on horses, I was busy learning about the intricate web of my grandmother's will. Before I tell you how I turned that rainy night into a $1 million victory, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? I want to hear your stories. Let's go back 6 months, the day my grandmother, Alina, passed away. She was the only one in the family who saw me. She knew my father's temper and my mother's weakness. One afternoon, while we were sitting in her sun-drenched kitchen, she leaned in and whispered, "Maya, don't ever let them see your cards. Keep your head down and your eyes open. There is a storm coming and I've built you an umbrella. You just have to wait for the rain." I didn't understand her then. I thought she was just being poetic in her old age. But after the funeral, Mr. Henderson pulled me aside. He didn't give me a check. He didn't give me a house. He gave me a small, rusted key and a set of instructions. "On the day you have nowhere left to go," he told me, "come to my office, not a moment sooner." Well, that moment was now. I dragged my soaked boxes to my old beat-up car, every muscle in my body aching. I looked up at my bedroom window. I could see Chloe already tossing my old posters into a bin. She caught my eye and smirked, pulling the curtains shut. I got into the driver's seat, my clothes dripping onto the upholstery. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the rusted key. My hands were trembling, but not from the cold. They were trembling with the sudden, sharp weight of a secret. I started the engine and drove away from Elm Street. I didn't have a plan for where I would sleep, but I knew exactly where I was going first. I was going to see Mr. Henderson, and I was going to find out exactly what kind of umbrella my grandmother had built for me. The office of Henderson and Associates was located in a converted Victorian house on the edge of town. It was nearly 8:00 p.m. when I pulled into the gravel driveway. The lights were still on in the downstairs window. I sat in my car for a moment, the heater blasting as I tried to dry my hair with a gym towel. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from my mother. "Don't be dramatic, Maya. We just need the space for Chloe's yoga studio. You can come back and get the rest of your junk on Saturday if it's dry." I didn't reply. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They didn't even realize they had thrown me out into a storm. To them, I was just junk taking up square footage for a yoga studio. I grabbed my bag, the rusted key tucked deep in the inner pocket, and ran through the downpour to the front door. Mr. Henderson opened the door before I could even knock. He was a tall man with a face like creased parchment, wearing a cardigan that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. He looked at my soaked clothes, then at the time on his watch. "It's raining on Elm Street, I take it," he asked softly. "They locked the door, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "They put my things on the curb. Everything is ruined." He stepped aside to let me in. "Your grandmother was many things, Maya, but above all, she was a strategist. She knew your father's nature. She knew he viewed people as assets to be liquidated. She spent the last 3 years of her life ensuring that you would never be an asset on his ledger." He led me into a back office lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. On his desk sat a thick, leather-bound folder. He didn't ask for the key yet. Instead, he poured me a cup of tea and waited for me to stop shivering. "Before we open this," Henderson began, "you need to understand the why. Your father believes that when Alina died, she left the family estate to him as the sole heir. He thinks the house on Elm Street, the vacant lot by the lake, and her savings were his birthright. And legally, on the surface, he's right. The probate court confirmed it." I felt a sink in my stomach. Then why am I here? If he owns everything, what umbrella did she build? Mr. Henderson smiled, a slow, thin-lipped expression. "Because your father only looked at the top layer of the soil. He never looked at the roots." He slid the leather folder toward me. "6 months before she passed, your grandmother moved $1.2 million, the entirety of her private investment portfolio and the deed to the lakefront property, into a private, irrevocable trust. Not an estate, a trust." My breath hitched. "I don't understand. A trust for who?" "For the one person she knew would actually value it," Henderson said. He nodded toward the folder. "Use the key, Maya." I pulled the rusted key from my pocket. It didn't look like a bank key. It looked like something from an old garden gate. Henderson reached under his desk and pulled out a small, heavy iron lockbox. I inserted the key. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clunk. Inside was a single document, crisp and white, stamped with a golden seal. I scanned the lines, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The Alina Vance Irrevocable Trust. Primary beneficiary, Maya Vance. Successor trustee, Maya Vance, effective upon 22nd birthday or displacement from primary residence." "Displacement from primary residence," I whispered. "She knew," Henderson said. "She added a trigger clause. If your parents ever forced you out of the home, the trust would activate immediately. As of 6:42 p.m. today, when your father locked that door, you became the sole owner of a $1.2 million portfolio and a prime piece of real estate." I stared at the numbers. $1.2 million. It was more money than my father had lost in 10 years of gambling. It was more money than my mother had ever seen in her life. "But there's a catch," Henderson warned, leaning forward. "The trust is private. Your father doesn't know it exists. Right now, he is likely at home with your mother and Chloe, celebrating their new yoga studio. He is also, according to my sources, preparing to sign a listing agreement to sell the lakefront lot to a developer to pay off his most recent debts." "He can't sell it if I own it," I said, a spark of something, not just hope, but fire igniting in my chest. "He can try," Henderson corrected. "And if he signs that contract, he'll be committing fraud. He'll be promising to sell land he doesn't own. The penalties would be catastrophic for him." I looked out the window at the dark, rainy night. I thought about my soaked boxes on the curb. I thought about Chloe smirking behind the curtain. "He thinks I'm a victim," I said, my voice steady now. "He thinks he won." "So," Henderson asked, "what do we do? Do we call him and tell him the truth? Or do we let him walk into the trap he's built for himself?" I looked at the golden seal on the trust document. I thought about the next 10 years of my life. "Let him walk," I said. "In fact, let's help him pick up the pace." I spent that night in a cheap motel, but I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed with the trust documents spread out over the polyester bedspread. For the first time in my life, the power dynamic had shifted. My father, David, had spent 22 years making me feel small, like a line item he couldn't wait to delete. Now, he was the one standing on a crumbling ledge, and he had no idea I was the only one holding the safety rope. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the air sharp and cold. I drove back to Elm Street, not to beg, but to collect the last of my things. As I pulled up, I saw a sleek, black SUV parked in the driveway. A man in a sharp charcoal suit was standing on the porch with my father. They were shaking hands. My father had that big man grin on his face, the one he wore whenever he thought he'd pulled a fast one on the world. I stepped out of my car. My father's grin vanished the moment he saw me. "I told you, Saturday, Maya, we're busy here. This is Mr. Sterling from North Face Development." Mr. Sterling turned to me, nodding politely. "We're just finalizing the paperwork for the lakefront lot. Your father tells me it's been in the family for generations." "It has," I said, my voice incredibly calm. I looked directly at the clipboard in my father's hand. He was holding a pen, the heavy, silver one he'd bought himself when he thought he was going to be a real estate mogul. "Is that the sale agreement?" "None of your business," my father snapped, stepping between me and the developer. "Go get your trash from the curb and get out. We have a closing to discuss." "I just want to make sure you're doing the right thing, Dad," I said. "Grandma loved that land. She used to say it was the most valuable thing she owned." My father laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Well, Alina isn't here to pay the property taxes, is she? Mr. Sterling is offering a very generous cash settlement. It's going to fix a lot of problems around here." I knew exactly what problems he meant. He owed money to people who didn't use lawyers to collect. He was desperate, and desperation makes people sloppy. I watched as he pressed the pen to the paper. I watched the ink flow, the signature that officially committed him to selling a property that had been legally transferred to me the moment he locked that front door the night before. "There," my father said, handing the clipboard back to Sterling. "All yours. When can I expect the earnest money wire?" "Within 48 hours, Sterling replied. "Once the title company does their final sweep, we're good to go." The title company, that was the ticking clock. My father assumed the title was clear because it had been 6 months since the probate court ruling. He didn't know that Mr. Henderson had filed the trust. Notice of interest at the county recorder's office at 8:01 a.m. that morning. As Sterling walked to his SUV, my father turned to me, his chest puffed out. "You see that, Maya? That's how real business is done. Maybe if you'd been more like Chloe, you'd be getting a cut. But since you want to be independent, you can find your own way. Don't come back." "I won't," I said. I picked up the last soggy box of my childhood journals. "But Dad, you should check your email later. I sent you a link to a moving company. You might need it sooner than you think." He just rolled his eyes and went back inside, shouting for my mother to bring him a beer to celebrate. I drove straight to a new luxury apartment complex downtown, the kind of place with a doorman and a gym. Using a small fraction of the trust's liquid cash, I signed a lease for a penthouse unit. The doorman looked at my wet, ragged boxes and my beat-up car, then at the black titanium debit card Mr. Henderson had issued me. His attitude changed instantly. As I stood in the center of my new living room, overlooking the city skyline, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the trust's legal portal. Alert, title inquiry initiated by North Face Development. Response, title flagged. Ownership conflict detected. The trap was set. My father had already started spending the money in his head. He'd probably already promised Chloe a new car. Before I tell you what happened when the developer called my father back 2 hours later, remember to drop your city in the comments. I'm reading through them, and I love seeing how far this story is reaching. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It wasn't the developer, it was my father. He wasn't yelling this time. His voice was high-pitched, almost frantic. Maya, pick up. That lawyer of Alina's, Henderson. He's saying there's a problem with the deed. He's saying your name is on it. What did you do? What did you tell them?" I sat back on my new velvet sofa and took a sip of cold water. "I didn't do anything, Dad," I said. "I'm just the girl who doesn't belong in your house, remember. If there's a problem with the deed, you should probably talk to your lawyer. Oh, wait. You don't have one, do you? You spent that money on the horses. Listen to me, you little." I hung up. The silence that followed hanging up on my father was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I sat in my new apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a world that looked completely different than it had 24 hours ago. In that house on Elm Street, I was a nuisance. Here, I was a homeowner. But the peace didn't last long. My phone began to glow with a barrage of texts, not from my father this time, but from Chloe. Maya, what did you do? Dad is throwing things. He says you stole the lake property. Sterling's office just called and said the contract is void. They're talking about a liquidated damages clause. Is it true you have money? I didn't answer. I knew exactly what that clause meant. In most high-stakes real estate contracts, if a seller knowingly signs a deal for property they don't actually own, the buyer can sue for the costs of the title search, the legal fees, and a penalty. For North Face development, that penalty was a flat $45,000. An hour later, there was a buzz at my door. I looked at the security monitor. It was my mother. She looked small on the screen, her shoulders hunched against a wind that wasn't there. She looked like a woman who had spent 20 years letting someone else make the decisions, only to realize the person in charge had driven them into a wall. I opened the door. She gasped when she saw the lobby, then the elevator, and finally my living room. Maya, she whispered, clutching her purse. How are you staying here? Your father said you were staying at a shelter. Dad says a lot of things, Mom, I said, leaning against the kitchen island. Would you like some tea? She walked to the window, staring out at the city. He's in trouble, Maya, real trouble. Mr. Sterling's lawyers sent a formal demand. They want $45,000 by Friday or they're filing a fraud report with the police. Your father, he doesn't have it. He already spent the earnest money he thought he was getting to pay off his old debts. That sounds like a David Vance problem, I said, my voice cold. She turned around, her eyes welling with tears. He's your father, and Chloe. She was supposed to start that yoga certification next month. Now the bank is calling about the house on Elm Street. They're saying since the lake lot isn't yours to sell, they're reevaluating our home equity loan. We could lose everything. You already lost me, Mom, I reminded her. You watched him throw my things into the mud. You dropped the trash bag yourself. Where was this family talk when I was standing in the rain? She looked down at her shoes. I was just trying to keep the peace. You know how he gets. Keeping the peace is just another way of saying you let him be a bully because it was easier for you, I said. Grandma saw it coming. That's why she left me the trust. She knew he'd burn through his own life, and she didn't want him burning through mine. A trust, my mother breathed. How much? Is it enough to cover the $45,000? If you just pay that, the developers will go away. We can go back to being a family. We'll give you your room back. We'll tell Chloe she has to wait. I laughed, and it felt like a release. You think I want to go back to that room? After he locked the door? Mom, I don't think you understand. I'm not just a beneficiary. I'm the trustee. I have a legal obligation to protect this money from people like Dad. If I gave you that money, I'd be breaking the law. That was a slight exaggeration, but she didn't know that. Please, she begged. He's talking about handling it himself. He's going to come here, Maya. He found out where you are from the doorman's log. I checked my watch. Then he's about 10 minutes late. And Mom, I didn't tell you this, but Mr. Henderson isn't just my lawyer. He's also the executor of Grandma's other secret. Her face went pale. What other secret? The house on Elm Street, I said. Grandma didn't own it outright, but she held the private mortgage for you and Dad. And in the trust documents I signed last night, she transferred that mortgage to me. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I wasn't just the owner of the lake. I was now my parents' landlord. You wouldn't, she whispered. I don't know, I said. I haven't decided yet, but I think it's time you went home and told Dad that if he wants to talk to me, he needs to bring a lot more than an apology. He needs to bring a check for the rent he's missed. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed again. A notification from the lobby. David Vance is downstairs. Should we send him up? I looked at my mother. Do you want to stay and watch this, or do you want to take the back exit? My mother chose the back exit. She couldn't handle the collision that was about to happen, and honestly, I didn't blame her. She had spent a lifetime avoiding the wreckage my father left behind. I, on the other hand, was ready to stand right in the center of it. I tapped the screen on my intercom. "Send him up," I told the doorman. "But keep a security guard on standby near the elevator, just in case." A few minutes later, the heavy chime of my doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite ring. It was the sound of someone holding the button down until they got what they wanted. I opened the door, and there he was, David Vance. He looked out of place in the marble-floored hallway, his face flushed a deep, angry purple, his cheap windbreaker still damp from the outside air. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me into the apartment, his eyes darting around the high ceilings and the designer furniture. "Where is it?" he barked, turning to face me. "Where's the money, Maya? I know Henderson gave you access to Alina's accounts. That money belongs to this family, not to a 22-year-old girl playing house in a skyscraper." "It belongs to the trust, Dad," I said, closing the door and locking it with a soft click. "And according to the law, I am the trust." He stepped toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me, just like he had on the porch in the rain. "Listen to me very carefully. I have a developer threatening to call the police for fraud. I have bills piling up that you can't even imagine. You are going to transfer $45,000 to my account right now, or I swear." "Or you'll what?" I interrupted, crossing my arms. "You'll kick me out. You already did that. You'll disown me. You did that too. You have no cards left to play, David." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "I'm your father. I provided for you for 2 decades. You owe me. This apartment, this lifestyle, it's built on my mother's money, my inheritance." "Actually," I said, walking over to the kitchen island and picking up a blue folder Mr. Henderson had dropped off an hour ago. "It's built on her foresight. She knew you'd try to sell the lake. She knew you gamble away your own house if given the chance. That's why she didn't just give me the money. She gave me the debt." I slid a document across the marble counter. It was a copy of the private mortgage agreement for the house on Elm Street. "What is this?" he muttered, squinting at the fine print. "Grandmother Alina lent you the money to buy that house 15 years ago, Dad. You haven't been paying a bank. You've been paying her. And according to these records, you've missed the last 4 payments. You told Mom you were paying them, but you were actually putting that money into your business ventures at the track." My father's hand began to shake as he reached the bottom of the page. "She transferred the lien to the trust," I continued, my voice as cold as the glass windows behind me. "Which means I don't just own the lake you tried to sell. I own the roof over your head. As of yesterday, I am your lien holder. And as of this morning, I am issuing a formal notice of default." He looked up at me, the anger in his eyes replaced by a sudden, jarring flicker of fear. You're foreclosing on your own parents." "I'm protecting the trust's assets," I said, quoting Mr. Henderson's exact words. "If the tenant is unreliable and the property is losing value, I have a fiduciary duty to act. If you don't have that $45,000 for the developer, I highly doubt you have the $16,000 in back payments you owe me." "Maya, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "We're family. You can't put your sister on the street." "You put me on the street in a thunderstorm, Dad. You didn't care about family when my books were getting soaked in the gutter. You cared about Chloe's yoga studio." I stepped closer to him. "Here is the deal. You are going to leave this apartment. You are going to go home and tell Chloe that she needs to get a job. And tomorrow, Mr. Henderson is going to send you a list of terms. If you want to stay in that house, you're going to play by my rules. No more gambling. No more business deals. And most importantly, you're going to apologize to me. Not because you want money, but because you realize you almost destroyed the only person who can save you." He opened his mouth to argue, to scream, to exert the last of his power. But then the elevator door opened, and a large security guard stepped out into the foyer, looking at my father with a professional, unyielding gaze. David Vance looked at the guard, then back at me. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Without another word, he turned and walked out. But I knew him too well. He wasn't going to go home and reflect. He was going to call Chloe. And Chloe was the one who truly knew how to hurt me. Before we move on to part 6, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Things are about to get even more intense as Chloe decides to take matters into her own hands. 10 minutes after my father left, my phone rang. It was a FaceTime call from Chloe. When I answered, she wasn't crying. She was standing in my grandmother's old bedroom at the Elm Street house, holding a sledgehammer. "You think you can take our house, Maya?" she hissed. "If we're leaving it in pieces." My heart stopped as I looked at the screen of my phone. Chloe wasn't just angry, she was unhinged. She stood in the center of the room that had once been our grandmother's sanctuary, a room filled with hand-carved molding and original plasterwork from the 1920s. She swung the sledgehammer back, her eyes wide with a manic kind of glee. "Stop it, Chloe," I screamed into the phone. "That isn't just a house, it's Grandma's legacy. If you touch those walls, you're not just hurting me, you're committing a felony." "It's not a legacy if it belongs to a traitor," Chloe yelled back. "You're the landlord now, right? Well, every landlord knows that tenants leave a little wear and tear when they move out." The call cut to black. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys and ran for the elevator. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the button for the lobby. I called Mr. Henderson on the way to the parking garage. "She's at the house," I told him, my voice cracking. "She's going to destroy it. She has a sledgehammer, Henderson. She's going to tear down the walls before the foreclosure even starts." "Maya, listen to me." Henderson's voice was calm, but urgent. "Do not go in there alone. I am calling the sheriff's office right now. That house is an asset of the trust. Any damage she does is considered waste in a legal sense, and she can be held criminally liable for the destruction of property. I'll meet you there." I didn't wait for the police. I drove like a woman possessed, weaving through the late afternoon traffic, my mind racing. That house was the only thing I had left that felt like my grandmother. The smell of her lavender tea was still in the curtains. The height markers where she'd measured me every summer were still on the pantry door frame. When I pulled onto Elm Street, I saw my father's truck in the driveway. He was standing on the lawn, but he wasn't stopping her. He was just leaning against the hood of the truck, his head in his hands, looking like a man who had finally given up. My mother was on the porch, sobbing. And from inside the house, I heard the first sickening thud. Crack. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I jumped out of my car and sprinted toward the front door. "Dad, stop her," I yelled as I ran past him. He didn't even look up. "She's right, Maya," he muttered. "If we can't have it, nobody should." I burst through the front door. The hallway was already filled with white dust. I ran toward Grandma's room. Chloe had already put a massive hole in the drywall next to the closet. She was lifting the hammer again, aiming for the stained glass window, the one Grandma had imported from Italy 50 years ago. "Chloe, don't." I lunged forward, grabbing the handle of the hammer just as she swung. The momentum threw us both against the wall. Chloe scrambled up, her face smeared with drywall dust, looking like a ghost of the sister I used to know. "Get out," she screamed. "This is our house. You think you're better than us because you have a fancy apartment and a trust fund? You're nothing. You're just the girl we kicked out into the rain." "I'm the girl who is trying to keep you out of jail," I shouted back. "Look at what you're doing. You're destroying the only thing Grandma left for us to share." "She didn't leave it for us," Chloe spat. "She left it for you. She always liked you more, the quiet one, the reliable one. Well, let's see how reliable you are when you have to rebuild this place brick by brick." She reached for a heavy ceramic vase, the one that held Grandma's ashes before we scattered them. It was empty now, but it was still precious. She raised it over her head, ready to shatter it against the floor. "Drop it, Chloe." The voice came from the doorway. It wasn't me. It was a sheriff's deputy, his hand resting on his belt, with Mr. Henderson standing right behind him. Chloe froze. The vase hovered in the air. "Put the vase down and step away from the sledgehammer," the deputy said firmly. "We've had a report of a domestic disturbance and intentional destruction of property. Miss Vance, if you drop that vase, I'm going to have to take you in." Chloe's lip trembled. She looked at the deputy, then at me, then at the hole in the wall. The reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in. She slowly lowered her arms and set the vase on the floor. Then, she slumped against the wall and started to howl, not a cry, but a scream of pure, frustrated rage. As the deputy led her out of the room to talk to her on the porch, Mr. Henderson stepped inside the ruined bedroom. He looked at the shattered drywall and the dust-covered floor. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said softly. I looked at the hole in the wall. Through the splintered wood, I saw something. A flash of something metallic tucked inside the wall cavity, behind where the lath had been broken. I walked over, reaching into the darkness of the wall. My fingers brushed against a heavy, cold metal box. "Henderson," I whispered, "what is this?" Before I tell you what was hidden inside the walls of the Elm Street house for 15 years, I want to ask you a question. Do you believe in luck, or do you believe people get exactly what they deserve? Let me know in the comments. I pulled the box out. It was a small floor safe, the kind people used to hide in secret compartments before home security systems existed. And on the top of the safe, there was a sticky note, the ink faded but the handwriting unmistakable. For the one who stayed when the house was falling down. Elena, the dust from the drywall was still settling, coating my hair and clothes in a fine white powder, but I didn't care. I sat on the edge of the bed, the small metal box resting heavily on my lap. Mr. Henderson stood by the door, his eyes sharp with curiosity. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of the sheriff's deputy telling my father to calm down and the distant, rhythmic sobbing of my mother. "She knew," I whispered, tracing the faded ink on the sticky note. "She knew Chloe would try to tear this place apart." "Your grandmother was always 3 steps ahead of everyone in this town, Maya," Henderson said, stepping closer. "She didn't just build an umbrella, she built a bunker. Do you have the combination?" I looked at the box. It didn't have a digital keypad. It was an old-fashioned dial. I thought back to the summer I turned 12, the same summer Iris, that girl from the stories I used to watch, had been at her cabin. My grandmother had spent every afternoon teaching me how to bake bread. She was obsessed with measurements. 3 turns to the right for the salt, Maya, 2 to the left for the sugar, 1 full circle for the yeast. I tried it. 3 to the right, 30, 2 to the left, 20, 1 full circle back to 10. Click. The lid popped open. Inside wasn't a pile of gold or a stack of cash. It was a single, yellowed envelope and a small, leather-bound ledger. I opened the ledger first. It was a record of every cent my grandmother had ever lent my father. But it wasn't just a mortgage record. As I flipped through the pages, my heart began to sink. Every entry was followed by a note. June 14th. Lent David $5,000 for business expansion. Found out he spent it at the Riverside Casino. August 22nd. David asked for money for Maya's dental work. Kept the money. I paid the dentist directly. It went on for years. A systematic record of every lie my father had ever told. But the last page was the one that changed everything. "Henderson, look at this," I said, handing him the envelope. He pulled out a document and put on his reading glasses. His face went from curious to absolutely stony. "Good Lord," he breathed. "Maya, do you know what this is?" "It looks like a deed," I said. "It's not just a deed. It's a life estate revocation," Henderson explained, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and professional satisfaction. 15 years ago, when your grandmother sold this house to your father, she didn't actually sell it. She granted him a life estate on the condition of 0 waste. In legal terms, that means he could live here as long as he maintained the property and didn't diminish its value or commit illegal acts on the premises. I looked at the hole Chloe had smashed in the wall. I looked at the sledgehammer on the floor. By attempting to sell the lake lot fraudulently, and by Chloe destroying the master bedroom under his watch, Henderson continued, the conditions of the life estate have been violated. This document, combined with the trust I filed this morning, means your father's right to live here didn't just end because of the mortgage. It ended the moment that sledgehammer hit the wall. I stood up, the ledger clutched to my chest. "So he doesn't have 30 days to leave." "Maya," Henderson said, looking me dead in the eye. "He doesn't have 30 minutes. The house has already reverted to the trust. You can have the sheriff remove them right now." I walked out of the bedroom and onto the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could see curtains twitching in the houses across the street. My father was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, looking at the ground. Chloe was standing by the deputy's car, her face red and tear-stained. "Dad," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air. He looked up, a glimmer of his old defiance in his eyes. "What? You come out to gloat some more. You got what you wanted, didn't you? You called the cops on your own sister." "I didn't get what I wanted, Dad," I said, walking down the porch steps. "I wanted a father who cared more about me than a gambling debt. I wanted a sister who didn't try to destroy my memories because she was jealous of a ghost." I held up the ledger. "I found Grandma's book. I know about the casino. I know about the dental money you stole from me when I was 10. And I found the life estate papers." The color drained from his face. He knew exactly what those papers meant. He'd been banking on the tenants' rights, laws to keep him in the house for months while he fought me in court. "The deputy is still here," I said, nodding toward the officer. "I can have him escort you off the property right now, or you can pack one suitcase each, get in that truck, and leave. If you go now, I won't file the destruction of property charges against Chloe. She can go to that yoga studio, or she can go to a cell. It's up to you." My mother stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Maya, where are we supposed to go?" "You have the $45,000 you were going to pay the developer, don't you?" I asked. "Oh, wait. Dad already spent that, didn't he?" I looked at my father. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, walked into the house, and came out 5 minutes later with a single duffel bag. Chloe followed him, her head down, her bravado completely vanished. As they loaded into the truck, my father stopped and looked at me one last time. "You're just like her," he spat. "Cold, calculating, you always were Alina's favorite." "She didn't have a favorite, Dad," I said. "She just had a plan for the one she knew would survive you." Before I tell you what I found in the very back of that safe, the thing that explained why my grandmother really didn't trust my father, I want to know, would you have let them take a suitcase, or would you have sent them away with nothing? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading every single one. The truck pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. As the taillights disappeared around the corner, I went back inside. I sat on the floor of the ruined bedroom and reached back into the iron safe. There was one more thing at the bottom. A photograph. I sat on the dusty floor of my grandmother's ruined bedroom, the weight of the iron safe still pressing against my legs. Outside, the neighborhood had returned to a chilling, artificial silence. The sheriff's cruiser had left, and the dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun streaming through the hole Chloe had smashed in the wall. I reached into the very back of the safe and pulled out the photograph I'd seen earlier. It was an old Polaroid, the edges yellowed with age. It showed a younger version of my grandmother, Alina, standing in front of the Elm Street house. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a kind smile, eyes that looked exactly like mine. On the back, in Grandma's elegant cursive, were 5 words that shattered my understanding of my own life. "Maya, your father's greatest fear." Attached to the photo was a birth certificate. Not mine, my father's. Or rather, a document showing that David Vance had been adopted. My grandmother had never told anyone. David had grown up believing he was the biological heir to the Vance legacy, but Alina had kept the truth hidden to protect him from his own insecurities. I realized then why he had always resented me. I wasn't just the reliable one. I was the one who actually looked like the man in the photo, Alina's true biological brother who had died young. To David, every time he looked at me, he saw the real bloodline he could never truly claim. He wasn't just fighting me for money. He was fighting a ghost for a sense of belonging he felt he had to steal. "Maya," Mr. Henderson's voice came from the hallway. He was holding his cell phone, his expression puzzled. "I have someone on the line who says they need to speak with the actual owner of the Cedar Lake property immediately." I stood up, wiping the drywall dust from my jeans. "Who is it?" "It's Mr. Sterling, from North Face Development." I took the phone. "This is Maya Vance." "Miss Vance," Sterling's voice was different than it had been on the porch. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, clipped tone. "I've just come from a meeting with my board of directors. We've seen the title flag. We know about the trust." "Then you know the contract my father signed is worthless," I said. "Technically, yes," Sterling replied. "But we've already invested $60,000 in environmental surveys and site planning for that lakefront lot. We need that land to complete the Ridgeline project. If we don't break ground by next month, our investors will pull out." I leaned against the window frame, looking out at the empty driveway where my father's truck used to sit. "That sounds like a major problem for North Face, Mr. Sterling, but I told my father I wouldn't sell. My grandmother wanted that land kept in the family." "Everyone has a price, Miss Vance," Sterling said. "We're prepared to increase our offer. $650,000 cash, close in 7 days. No inspections. We'll even throw in a $20,000 consultation fee just for your trouble." I looked at the photograph in my hand, at the man with my eyes. My grandmother hadn't just protected the land, she had protected me. She knew that one day I would have to make a choice, hold on to the past or build a future. "I'm not interested in $650,000, I said. "Name your price," Sterling urged. "We're backed into a corner here." I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was watching me with a raised eyebrow. A plan began to form in my mind, a way to finish this once and for all. "I'll sell you the lake lot," I said slowly. "But not for cash, I want a trade." "A trade?" Sterling sounded confused. "We're a development company, Miss Vance. What could we possibly have that you want?" "You own the old commercial strip on 4th Street, I said. "The one where my father's building supply store is located. The one he's 3 months behind on rent for." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "We do," Sterling said. "It's a secondary asset for us." "I want the deed to that commercial strip," I said. "And I want the $45,000 penalty my father owes you for the failed contract to be converted into a personal debt held by me, not your company. You get the lake, I get the store." Mr. Henderson's jaw dropped. He realized what I was doing. I wasn't just becoming my father's landlord at home. I was about to become his boss at work. "If I agree to this," Sterling said, "we need the lake deed signed by tomorrow morning." "Deal," I said. I hung up the phone and looked at the ruin of the bedroom. My sister had tried to destroy my house. My father had tried to steal my future. Now, they were going to find out what happens when you hand the keys of your life to the person you treated like trash. But before I could even process the deal, my phone buzzed with a private number. I answered, thinking it was Sterling calling back. It wasn't. It was my mother. She was whispering, and I could hear the sound of a TV blaring in the background, the sound of a cheap motel room. "Maya," she hissed, "you have to change your locks at the apartment. David." He didn't pack his old keys. "He's talking about going back there tonight while you're at the house. He says if he can't have the money, he's taking the collateral you have stored in your safe." My blood ran cold. My apartment safe didn't have money in it. It had the original trust ledgers and the only copies of the life estate revocation. "Mom, where is he now?" "He just left," she sobbed. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't wait for the elevator. I practically flew down the stairs of the Elm Street house, shouting for Mr. Henderson to stay and secure the property. The drive back to the city was a blur of neon lights and adrenaline. My father had spent his whole life trying to gamble his way into a win, but this was his most desperate bet yet. He wasn't just stealing papers, he was trying to erase the evidence of his own failure. When I pulled up to my apartment complex, I didn't see his truck. He had parked blocks away to avoid the doorman's suspicion. I bolted through the lobby, giving the security guard a sharp nod. "If David Vance comes back down, do not let him leave," I commanded. I reached the penthouse floor and saw my front door was slightly ajar. He hadn't even kicked it in. He had used the emergency key I'd kept in a magnetic box under my car, a car he had helped me maintain years ago. He was using my own trust against me. I walked in quietly. The living room was dark, save for the glow of a flashlight coming from my small home office. I stood in the doorway and watched. My father was on his knees in front of my floor safe, swearing under his breath as he tried to pry the door open with a crowbar. "It's a biometric lock, Dad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "It only opens for my thumbprint. No amount of hardware store tools is going to change that." He jumped, the crowbar clattering onto the hardwood floor. He scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, looking more like a cornered animal than a man. You think you're so smart. You think you can just lock us out and keep everything for yourself." "I'm not keeping it for myself," I said, walking toward my desk. I didn't look at him. I looked at the black titanium card sitting on my blotter. "I'm keeping it from being destroyed, just like you almost destroyed the lake, just like Chloe destroyed Grandma's room." "I was the one who took care of her," he roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "I was the one who stayed in this pathetic town while she got old. I earned that money." "You didn't take care of her, David," I said, finally looking him in the eye. "You waited for her to die so you could cash her out, but she saw you coming from a mile away. She knew you weren't a Vance by blood, but she hoped you were one by heart. She was wrong." I reached into my bag and pulled out the old Polaroid I'd found in the wall. I tossed it onto the desk. "I know about the adoption. I know why you look at me and see a threat instead of a daughter." He stared at the photo, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The silence in the room was suffocating. For a second, I saw a flash of the man he could have been, the man Grandma Alina had hoped for. Then his eyes hardened again. "It doesn't matter," he hissed. "Without those trust ledgers, you can't prove a thing in probate. If I take those papers, the original will stands." "It's too late for that," I said. I picked up my phone and showed him the screen. "I just finalized a deal with Mr. Sterling from North Face Development. I traded the lake lot." "You did what?" he gasped. "You sold it for how much?" "I didn't sell it for money," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "I traded it for the deed to your building supply store, and I bought your $45,000 debt from Sterling, which means, as of 5 minutes ago, you don't just owe the developer, you owe me." He slumped back against the safe, his legs giving out. You own the store." "I own the land, the building, and your debt," I confirmed. "And here is how it's going to work. You are going to leave this apartment right now. You are going to take Mom and Chloe to that motel and stay there. Tomorrow, you will show up at the store at 8:00 a.m. You will work as a manager, under my supervision. Your salary will go directly toward paying back the $45,000 and the back mortgage on the house." "You're making me your employee," he whispered, horrified. "No," I corrected. "I'm giving you a job. It's more than you gave me when you threw my things in the rain. If you miss a day, I evict you from the store. If you gamble again, I foreclose on the house on Elm Street. This is your last chance to actually earn your place in this family." He looked at the crowbar on the floor, then at the girl he had once called junk. The power shift was complete. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a man on probation. "Mom called me," I added softly. "She's the only reason I'm not calling the police right now for this break-in. Go home, David." He didn't argue. He picked up his jacket, avoided my gaze, and shuffled out of the apartment. I watched the door close, and for the first time in weeks, I let out a breath I'd been holding since that rainy Tuesday. But the story wasn't over. As I went to lock the door, I noticed a small, handwritten envelope tucked into the frame where my father had been standing. It wasn't in his handwriting. It was in Chloe. I opened it, expecting more threats. Instead, there was a single key and a note. "Check the attic. She left one more thing, and Dad never found it because he was too busy looking at the safe." Before I tell you what was waiting in the attic of the house on Elm Street, the final piece of the puzzle that changed my relationship with my sister forever, I have to ask, do you think David will actually show up to work for his daughter, or will he run? Tell me your theories in the comments. The drive back to Elm Street felt different this time. The anger that had fueled me for days had cooled into a quiet, heavy clarity. I arrived at the house at 2:00 a.m. The neighborhood was asleep, but the hole in the master bedroom wall looked like a dark, open wound under the streetlights. I used the key Chloe had left me, a small, silver skeleton key, and headed straight for the attic stairs. The attic was a place of dust and shadows, filled with the discarded remnants of 3 generations. I pushed past old mannequins and stacks of yellowing newspapers until I found a trunk tucked under the eaves, covered by a moth-eaten wool blanket. The silver key fit perfectly. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. It was a collection of journals, not Grandma Alina, but my sister. Beneath the journals sat a thick legal envelope addressed to both of us. For Maya and Chloe when the walls come down. I opened the letter. My grandmother's voice practically jumped off the page. Maya, you were born with my eyes and my iron will. You are the shield. But Chloe was born with your father's fear. She is the one who needs the most help, yet she is the one who will fight it the hardest. I have left the assets to Maya because I know she will manage them. But the house is for both of you, provided you can stand in a room together without tearing it apart. Tucked into the envelope was a second trust document. It was a bridge trust. It stipulated that if Chloe completed 4 years of education or started a legitimate business without our father's interference, she would become a 50% co-owner of the Elm Street house. I looked at the journals. I opened the most recent one. The entries weren't about yoga or being better than me. They were filled with Chloe's terror, descriptions of our father's screaming matches with debt collectors, her fear that we'd be homeless, and her resentment that I seemed so ready to leave while she felt trapped. She hadn't swung that sledgehammer to hurt me. She had swung it because she felt the walls of her life closing in. 1 year later, I am sitting on the porch of the Cedar Lake cabin. The bridge trust is in full effect. Chloe is 3 semesters into a degree in architecture. Turns out, she's better at building walls than breaking them. She spends her weekends here, helping me restore the porch Grandpa built. We don't always agree, but we've learned how to talk without shouting. My father, he still works at the building supply store. He's no longer the owner. He's the head of inventory. He reports to me every Monday morning with a spreadsheet of his hours. He's paid off the $45,000 debt, and he hasn't been to a casino in 12 months. He's still a difficult man, and he'll never be the father I dreamed of, but for the first time in his life, he's an honest one. My mother stayed with him. She spends her days gardening at the Elm Street house, which we've fully restored. She told me recently that the day I threw them out was the day she finally woke up. As for me, I realized that the $1.2 million wasn't the inheritance. The inheritance was the strength to say no to people who didn't respect me, and the grace to say yes to the people who were willing to change. The lake is still and blue today. The pines are tall. And for the first time in 23 years, the name Vance doesn't stand for a debt. It stands for a foundation. Thank you so much for following my story. It's been a long journey from that rainy night on the curb to this porch at the lake. If you've learned anything from my story, let it be this. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in your own life. You hold the pen. You write the ending. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out my other videos. And remember, I'm reading your comments. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have given Chloe that second chance? Until next time, my name is Maya Vance, and this is my legacy.